Welcome to Cage Pages Radio, powered by the Fan-Sided Network, hosted by the Underground Kings of MMA Radio, John Franklin and TJ Craig. I'm John Franklin of CagePages.com. This week we will talk about all the relevant news of the week and preview UFC 179, the rematch between featherweight champion Jose Aldo and Team Alpha Male Dynamo and number one contender Chad Mendes. Without further ado, let me bring in my main man from the Hot Cage Daily, TJ Craig. TJ, how are you?
I'm doing great. Excited for this weekend of fights. There was some big news this week, so man, let's get on it.
All right, I'm excited as well. I really want to get to the news this week because there was a lot going on. First, I want to start. Let's talk about Michael Bisping and Luke Rockhold. They were on Counterpunch, which is a new segment on the Ultimate Insider, which I love, by the way. They completely stole it from HBO Face Off with Max Kellerman, but that's neither here nor there. This week, they were on it. They engaged in some verbal sparring where they sort of called out one another's resumes. What are your thoughts on these two in terms of the fight, the counterpunch? Just give me what you got on them.
Well, I mean, this has gone back in the sparring days when they started arguing about, one knocking out the other, and the other one is the king of Strikeforce because he won, and it's basically two childish men going at it back and forth about some old beef that now they're trying to bring forth to, I think, promote the fight and get kind of hyped up, because I'll be honest with you, in my book right now, I think Michael Bisping is not a top 5, and I think he's doing what he can to get the beef going up with somebody like Luke, and he needs that. He needs something like that to, one, get him pumped up and fired up for this fight, kind of like he has always done, and two, he needs to make a name for himself.
I agree. I mean, I wrote a piece for Cage Pages about it, and I didn't want to be super critical of Michael Bisping. That's not what I'm trying to do, but I jokingly put in the article, he's been in the UFC 3 minutes longer than Dana White. He's never fought for a belt. So that's all you need to know if you're Luke Rockhold about fighting Michael Bisping and how good it is for your career. I don't think it's good for his career at all. I think there's some juice behind this fight, but Luke Rockhold even said himself, who's the last guy you beat that's still in the UFC? And it took Bisping a couple minutes. He said Kung Lee. Kung Lee just, and we'll talk about this later, was suspended. So, I mean, Bisping doesn't really have a lot of relevant wins. I just don't see what good it does to Luke Rockhold for his career. I think he's wasting his time with Bisping.
Yep.
All right, up next, Chuck Mindenhall of MMAfighting.com wrote a great piece about the fact that Americans have taken over all the divisions in the UFC with all the champions, but Jose Aldo, who's actually fighting an American this weekend, being American. Is there anything to the fact that all the champions in the UFC are Americans, other than Jose Aldo, or is this just sort of a historical coincidence?
I think it's just a historical coincidence. I mean, we're going to talk about what Royce Gracie kind of said here in a minute, but I think it's just a coincidence. I mean, with the fighters off, the more people that you have in a division or from a area for, say, North America or the U.S., including Canada, I mean, the number of those fighters that are on the UFC payroll outnumbers pretty much most of the Brazilians. So I think it's just pretty much a coincidence on that part.
I agree to a certain extent. Here's what I'll say about the Brazilian fighters, is that when they were doing well, it was in their favor that they were such close-knit and they were all near each other because they sort of had the UFC figured out and they were sort of sharing, trade secrets, if you will, and it worked out great. Now that they're not, the fact that they're so close in proximity also helps them, if they're on a rut. They're all doing the same thing. When it's going well, it's going well. When it's going poorly, it's going poorly across the board. So with all, with the boom of the MMA across the MMA landscape in really high-level gyms in the United States, as champions start to progress, they start to, this is where the best MMA is right now. There was a time when it was in Canada. There was a time when it was in Brazil. Right now it's in America. And I think part of it is the fact that some great champions have come along. Part of it's the fact that Anderson Silva got old. George St. Pierre retired. There are some other factors, but, America's where it is right now in terms of MMA. We're on the cutting edge. All right. Royce Gracie said he thinks there's something to it. He said Brazilian fighters lack strategy. They have talent. They have, the skill levels there and everything. They just don't. They're not very strategic. Do you think there's something to that? Is that a fair criticism from the godfather of the UFC?
Well, I think he also put it that, about the involvement of the sport, and I think there is somewhat some merit to that. I will have to say, one, just because it's coming from him, and I mean he's seen an abundant amount of fighters coming from Brazil. The family is trained a ton. I think it is. It's when you start lacking that strategy, one, using your jiu-jitsu or your wrestling, you kind of forget about the other aspects of the game or what you can use. So I think there is something that is into that. I think if you take a deeper look, you're starting to see a new, well, like Conor McGregor said, the new type of breed coming into the UFC, which I think ultimately that's what you're seeing. I mean, you're seeing these younger guys that have been training now for years since the UFC has started. I mean, the kids that were taking karate and judo at 5 and 6 year old are now coming into the UFC, and they're just a different breed because they have learned and adapted and evolved by growing up.
Yeah, and I mean, it's an evolution as well. I mean, I think part of it in terms of strategy, what Royce said was that, people have been trying to figure out the Brazilian puzzle for years now. I happen to think, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, I happen to think that there's a range at which you can really fight a fight that's really adverse to what a Brazilian fighter wants to do. There's a certain range that you get in that's a little bit beyond the distance of their jab, but then not yet in the clinch. There's sort of that middle area. Dillashaw found it. Chris Weidman certainly found it. Cain Velasquez certainly found it. And I think that's the area that when you fight these Brazilian fighters in, they're looking for space. If you don't give it to them, then you can defeat them. So I think the Americans have figured that out. All right, let's talk about the fight that's in the works between Alexander Gustafsson and Rashad Evans. When asked if he felt bad that Gustafsson lost his place in line, Daniel Cormier said, "It's a circumstance, man. I don't really know what that means." First, I'll ask you how excited you are about the Gustafsson-Evans fight, and then I'll talk to you about Cormier's involvement.
I'm actually a little bit excited for that fight. I think Gustafsson needs to get back in the ring so he can kind of keep off the ring rust and have an active fight. I think he will win that fight. I think it's a good matchup because Rashad Evans is a good wrestler. Of course, he likes to go down, ground and pound, but he has some pretty good stand-up. The difference is, of course, is going to be that Gustafsson reach on those legs and that on the arm on the reach with the jabs. So there's going to be a difference, but I'm very interested to see how the wrestling skills match up for Gustafsson on Rashad's end.
I think it'll be a hell of a fight. I mean, I think that, like you said, there are some advantages on both ends, but Rashad seems to figure those things out. He's never really overmatched in a fight. He always seems like he's ready to go. He's one of those guys where you look back and you go, man, what could this guy have been had he either not sort of been at odds with John Jones and stayed with Greg Jackson and figured out a way to coexist. I think in a perfect scenario, and again, we're playing the what-if game here, but if he'd have gone to 85 when he was still at Greg Jackson's, that would have been very interesting to me. He's at 85. He fights Anderson Silva maybe in his prime. That to me would have been a bit of a career turn. But he's battled some injuries too. So he seems to be happy with the Black Zillions. He's down in Florida. He seems to like that. So I mean, listen, if you had a choice between training in Florida and Albuquerque, that's a no-brainer for me in terms of location. But I don't know. How about Cormier? I mean, we had this sort of triangle between Gustafsson, Cormier, and Jones. We've now added Rashad Evans into the mix. Does that sort of build intrigue for you?
I mean, there's kind of intrigue there, but on Daniel's side, I mean, when he's saying it's a circumstance, man, did he feel bad for him? He said no, he didn't. Of course, you're not going to feel bad. You got the title fight, and Gustafsson didn't. So, I mean, would anybody in the right mind say, yeah, I feel bad for the guy, he should get his chance? Hell no. You're going to take it. It was offered, you're going to take it up. Now that the Gustafsson fight was Rashad Evans, what that does for Evans is if he beats Gustafsson, he's the next in line. I mean, that just catapults him right up to the top, so that's good on his part. So it's now a triangle where you kind of have a little bit of drama in there for excitement and in a division that John Jones has run through. So, his next two fights are in my book, Daniel then Gustafson. I think it's 1-2. Those are the best matchups for him right now.
Yeah, and again, I mean, we'll move on, but the UFC is always stacked. I mean, all these divisions, you start, as the UFC builds their roster, you start to see these guys. I mean, 205, listen, John Jones ran through it a couple years ago. We thought he was pretty much done with it. There was talk of going to heavyweight, but, I mean, there's a lot of interest for me with a fight between Cormier, Gustafson, and Evans for Jones at some point. Should he beat Cormier? I wouldn't mind seeing a rematch between him and Rashad, see how they've changed since the last fight. There's always going to be juice there between the two of them. Same thing with Gustafson. I mean, there's a lot in the 205 division. Phil Davis, which we'll talk about later, takes care of Glover Teixeira this weekend. Who knows? I mean, it starts to get really interesting at 205. All right. On the subject of fights that are sort of in the works, Cain Velasquez is out of UFC 180 with an injury. Mark Hunt is in. It will be Mark Hunt versus Fabricio Verdum for the interim heavyweight title. What's your big takeaway from this? I mean, is the story Velasquez's injury? Is it Verdum has a new opponent, or is it, the Cinderella man Mark Hunt? Seems like he's starting to, he sort of found his way into a title shot here.
I mean, one of the greatest comeback stories of all time has to be the Mark Hunt. I mean, the guy was pretty much on his way to bagging groceries, and that's just, I'm taking a little far with that. But then now he's fighting for the title. I think you do have two stories there. You have that story, and then you have the Cain Velasquez story. It just seems like he's caught the injury bug over late, and it just seems like he can't heal correctly, or something else happens. It kind of reminds me of Showtime Pettis. It's just, it's kind of a curse there when you think you're going and you're moving up and there's something big going to happen, and then bam, the injury bug just kicks your ass. So I mean, and for Hunt, he said he's excited, but his biggest is that weight cut. I think he's at 320, or it was around 300 pounds. He's going to have to drop to 265, so he has less than 3 weeks to do that, so we'll see how that goes. But he couldn't decline that offer.
Yeah, you can't. I mean, that's a lot of weight to drop in a very short period of time, but, I mean, you got to do it. I mean, you're right. You can't decline the offer. Mark Hunt, I mean, is probably the most interesting, exciting fighter to watch that could not be less represented in terms of endorsements. I remember he went out for that fight. I want to say maybe the Ben Rothwell fight, maybe the Stefan Struve fight, where he looked like he was wearing a pair of Ultimate Fighter shorts. It was like, dude, where are these endorsements? This guy is like walk-off knocking out dudes, and no one seems to care. So, I mean, he's got a presence on social media. He does tweet out some crazy stuff and do some nutty stuff on Instagram. But, I mean, he seems like a guy that you should get behind, or you think. I don't know. But I'm very interested to see the fight. I mean, listen, Verdum has had a very interesting career. Mark Hunt's just another guy in there. But, again, like you said, moving forward, the question becomes, in terms of injury, Cain's out a lot, Pettis is out a lot, Weidman's out right now. You got to start to wonder what is it that these guys are doing to either gain or keep the title that's forcing these injuries. Are they pushing themselves too far?
Yep.
All right. Dana White said this week that he would be interested to see a 100% healthy Brock Lesnar compete in the UFC. Listen, is there anything to this, or is this typical Brock Lesnar rumor? Is it Dana White trolling us? Like, what is this to you?
I mean, I think it's like every month we hear like a big story of Brock Lesnar coming out. Somebody wants to fight him and bring him back. I mean, Shane Carwin said he would love to do a match with him, come out of retirement. And, I mean, it's just, it's something to get hyped, and I think it's news. And, of course, one of the biggest pay-per-view pullers of all time for the UFC. I mean, why wouldn't they like it back? So him throwing it out there so Brock can kind of hear it, and if he's healthy, he would come back. But it's a win-win situation for both of them.
You know where I stand on this in terms of my interest in pro wrestlers coming in. Now, Brock Lesnar, listen, he came in, he paid his dues, he won the belt. You can make some statements about the heavyweight division at the time, whatever you want to do. But if he was a bum, Frank Mir at the time was not a bum. So if Brock was truly a bum, Frank would have taken him out the second fight. So for me, the thing I think is interesting is I really think there's a lot of meat on the bone of using the pro wrestling community. I just think that the mistake Bellator made was they went the wrong way with it. They're trying to put pro wrestlers, or they're trying to put MMA guys on the pro wrestling shows. You need to get pro wrestlers into MMA and see if they can fight. That's how you get the pro wrestling dollar, not going the other direction. And I think that's what Brock does. I mean, Brock is the, without question, highest drawing pay-per-view guy of all time.
Yep.
And it's clear why. He's a very polarized figure. Some people like to watch him get his ass kicked. Some people like to watch him kick ass. But, I think that if Brock Lesnar were to come back to the UFC, he's a game changer. I mean, he immediately is a top of the list main event type of guy who you don't have to necessarily put in there with your champions, because if he goes in there with Kane, he's probably going to be the same way he did last time. But you can put Brock in there with some interesting matchups and draw a lot of pay-per-views. So I think that you always have to take a Brock Lesnar rumor to come back to the UFC seriously, because he's a serious guy in terms of drawing fans.
Yep.
All right, Kung Lee has been vindicated. Well, kinda. His suspension has been rescinded based on a lack of sufficient lab results. Kung thinks the UFC owes him a public apology. Do you think the UFC owes him a public apology?
I can't say that they owe him a public apology until I kind of see all the facts of what happened. I mean, who screwed up handling of this drug testing? I mean, was it their fault? And if it was, then yes, I would have to say they owe him an apology. But is it something that it's not 100% capped? They weren't using the right the people to do this testing. So I have to dig. You have to dig into it deeper, and I kind of want to see how the facts come out before I really say yes. Because on the surface, right now I'm still saying no.
I agree, and I mean, listen, it was low-hanging fruit. When he popped, we all said, listen, this guy took a picture, he looked like an action figure, and of course he's on something, it has to be. And he comes out with kind of a lame excuse saying that, it was the lighting. I wrote a piece about it in This Week in MMA, and I said, if it's the case that it was the lighting that make Kung Lee look like that, it's the most popular lighting setup in the entire world right now, because everybody would be lighting their photos the way Kung Lee did if that's what made him look that way. So for me, I don't know, man. I think it does give us a little bit of a lesson in jumping to conclusions, because it is inconclusive now. We don't know if he actually popped. He sure as hell looked like it, yeah. But we don't know. So we jump to conclusions. We sort of, drug the guy's name through the mud, and then, now that he's not guilty in the strictest sense of the word, we kind of got a little bit of egg on our faces. Now, if you think that if you're Kung Lee, though, I don't know if I'd be out there demanding apologies and all that sort of thing, because if this were regular sports, not MMA, where the investigative journalism isn't what it should be, they would go find something. You don't poke at the media, or sort of once something comes out in the mainstream media, they continue to dig. It's like Ray Rice started and then it snowballed. Adrian Peterson started and then it snowballed. So if you got a little something, you need to get your ducks in a row. It's not the same with MMA media, but I think Kung may be playing with fire a little bit. I kind of feel like he's Rafael Palmeiro in the sense where he's sort of like sticking his finger at the camera saying, I didn't. It's like, dude, slow down. I mean, you were yoked and you're 40, whatever you are. Let's pump the brakes a little bit with, demanding for apologies.
Let me ask you a question real quick.
Go ahead.
Why is it that everybody who's taking these or popping thinks they're not going to get caught? I mean, and when they do, they deny. I mean, listen, honesty is the number one ally you have for that. But I just don't get it. I don't understand why people just keep going back to the fact that I didn't do it, and then you get popped, and it's finally, after everything comes out, then it's a massive apology, and then it's a year later, then you see the guy back in the ring or on the baseball field or on the football field. I don't get it. I mean, you take your slap on the hand, duck your tail, and, you'll see brighter days. I just don't get it.
Well, I think you kind of answered your question in your question, in the sense that, the hope is that you're not going to get caught. And you're right. If you take your medicine, give it time, the public will forgive you and all of that. And I agree with that. But I think that they're thinking that, if either way I'm going to end up back on the field, I think they're sort of banking on the fact that our news cycle turns over like pancakes, and it's like, what are you going to do if Kung Lee's the story one day, he's not the next. So if he just denies it, at some point he's no longer going to be relevant. They're just going to say, what's the point of constantly badgering Kung Lee if he's not going to tell us what we want to hear and there's something else to cover? I think they're just banking on the fact that there's. I mean, think about it. Ray Rice is no different than he was 4 weeks ago. We're just not talking about him.
Right.
Adrian Peterson is no different than he was 4 weeks ago. We're just not talking about him. So they're in the same boat. They're still dealing with the same issues. They still, one guy, dropped his fiance in an elevator, and another guy beat his kid with a stick. Those things are still the case. We're just not talking about them. So I think that's kind of what when you're a celebrity or you're in the public eye, you kind of bank on the fact that it's gonna go away if I just deny it long enough. All right. Finally, I want to talk about some fight. Actually, you know what? Before the fight announcements, one thing I forgot to put in the rundown, I'll throw it in here real quick. There is a serious beef that's been brewing for a couple weeks. Sort of came to a head this week between Mike Dolce and BJ Penn. Penn came out and sort of said that Dolce wasn't all he was cracked up to be in terms of a nutritionist. BJ gave him a lot of money. He didn't really do much for that money. And now, Dolce is sort of refuting that. I mean, listen, the guy's entire empire of dieting is banking on the fact that BJ Penn is not going to just badmouth him because BJ is a very popular fighter. And then now BJ said that the next time he sees him, he's going to, sort of take things up with his glass jaw. What do you think about this whole thing? Is the threat sort of out of bounds? This is the fight game. Tell me what your thoughts are on Dolce and Penn.
I don't know how to take it, because if BJ Penn is that upset about using his services for Dolce and it wasn't what he thought it was to be, then I guess he has to argue, but I don't think it's something that you take public. I mean, if you have a problem or a beef with a guy, you think you would do it behind closed doors. Once, because I wouldn't want it to make it look like an excuse of why I looked so bad in that ring on my last fight, and that's what seems to be the gist of that. We forget what he looked like in that fight. I mean, he wasn't moving, and to blame something else besides being prepared or being an age or being, any other excuse. We're starting to hear about this, and Dolce's, catching the backside of not being able to perform when obviously he's worked with plenty of other fighters that aren't complaining, and that he's getting them to cut weight and they're winning fights. So it's kind of surprising on my end from coming from BJ Penn.
Well, I'll take it from two counts, or on two different levels. One, I think kind of in what you said is where I found sort of what we're looking at here. Of course, BJ Penn wants to blame Mike Dolce, because then his insane stance that he took in that fight, his horrible shape that he was in, his cardio, his just our memory of what he was in that fight can all be wrapped up, put in a sack, and thrown over Mike Dolce's shoulder. It can all be laid at his feet. The reason why this all happened was because of Mike Dolce, even though that's ridiculous. From Dolce's point, you're never really a success until you have haters, right? So now we know that Dolce has fully made it because someone thinks that he's the worst thing that ever happened, and they're dogging his product, and they think he's a joke. And I just think for Dolce, I think that the best course of action for him is just to sort of come out and say, listen, BJ, we have a difference of opinion in how it went down in terms of what I provided for you. You know what? $20,000 might be worth my reputation. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say that we just weren't on the same page. Here's your 20 grand. I apologize for whatever it is that we didn't do. If I made any mistake, it was that I didn't communicate with you properly about what I was doing. Clearly, what I do works because, everybody does it. That's, I think, the way to go. You got to deflect this, man. If you start to get into wars with BJ Penn, you're not going to win, man. He's just too popular.
Yeah.
All right. I want to talk about some fight announcements really quick to kind of close out the news portion. Obviously, we mentioned Hunt versus Verdum. The two other significant fights announced this week with a long-awaited debut. There was supposed to be a debut. There was the weight issue, and now there's going to be another debut. 2008 Olympic gold medalist Henry Cejudo. He has a date with Dustin Kimura here in Phoenix on December 13th. He's an Arizona guy. Are you expecting big things out of Cejudo? I mean, he's fought on lesser on smaller promotions in the past. He's got kind of a reputation. He's a great wrestler, clearly. I don't know. Are you expecting anything from this kid?
I mean, yeah, I think we are. I mean, there's going to be, are we going to see somebody? I'll take Daniel Cormier from being Olympic Dan Henderson. Are we going to see that type of file that's a brawler that like stand up and has great wrestling skills that you just can't get away from it? So I'm interested to see. I'm interested to see his weight cut, how he looks, what he looks like on that weight day, and then also when he steps in that ring, because that first time, it changes. All the fighters pretty much say your first time in the UFC, you got the jitters. It's on a big stage. See how he reacts. I mean,